Now, if there's one word beginning with A that comes to mind when you hear the name Wes Streeting, it's aspiration. And he's made his aspirations clear this week, having resigned from his role as Health Secretary after calling for Keir Starmer to resign as Prime Minister to call for a leadership election in which he intended to take part in. His preliminary pitch to the public was aimed squarely at the centrist demographic, with a focus on his desire to rejoin the European Union. But today, he changed tack.
Former Health Secretary Wes Streeting has said he'd like to see a wealth tax. That's a tax on the money people make from investments in the UK. He would propose a wealth tax that works, equalising the rates of capital gains and income tax.
The approach that I'm setting out and the kite that I'm flying in this leadership contest will be to equalise those rates with allowances for genuine entrepreneurialism, investment, reinvestment, so that we can be both pro-worker, pro-entrepreneurialism, pro-fairness, and in the course of that, generate up to £12 billion worth of revenues.
That's a clear pitch towards not only Labour members, amongst whom Streeting currently trails against literally every single other potential leadership rival, but also towards Green defectors, as it's a supposedly fixed version of a policy already championed by the Green Party, who've been advocating for an equalisation of capital gains tax with income tax since before the last general election. It is worth noting, however, that an increase in capital gains tax is not a wealth tax, as much as Wes is calling it that given the salience of the policy championed by the progressive left, with accountant Adam Jaffiers telling the BBC this. This is not a wealth tax. It is an increase in the capital gains tax rate on non-business assets. It is also not a new idea. A wealth tax is an annual levy that targets high net worth individuals based upon their total asset holdings. Capital gains tax is imposed on the increase in value of an asset after it is sold. These are not the same thing. Despite the fact it isn't a wealth tax, multiple outlets have been reporting it as such, so I guess Wesley got the headlines that he wanted with this proposal. His policy has also been backed by tax lawyer Dan Needle, who described it as, quote, a good proposal on Twitter, although he did say that he cringed at Streeting referring to it as a wealth tax that works, quote unquote. Now, what's frustrating to me, of course, there are all the outlets describing this as a wealth tax, because clearly most of these outlets would much rather that potential people who would like an actual wealth tax, who are currently supporting the Green Party or other parties calling for such a policy, I believe Plaid Cymru and the Scottish Greens also want wealth taxes as well, are going to be hoodwinked potentially into thinking that Wes Streeting is actually proposing this when he is not. It's also funny to me, like, does anyone really seriously believe that somebody who was a very high-profile member of Labour together, who were poo-pooing the idea of wealth taxes all the way through the period in which the Labour right were in their ascendancy during Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party, has suddenly received some kind of Damascene conversion on this, you know? It's almost like the leadership election where Keir Starmer promised to make the 2017 Labour Manifesto a foundational document. Imagine if you've heard such promises before from somebody trying to win over an electorate that's, you know, got different priorities from the broader electorate. Ash, do you believe Wes Streeting when he is making this coded reference to left-wing policy or not?
I'm going to quote one of the great statesmen of our time, which is George W. Bush, who said, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, you won't get fooled again." I mean, look, what I think you've described is that the Labour Party is in a moment of being membership facing. So Wes Streeting is having to make a pitch to the membership, which has a set of politics, which is quite far to the left of his faction of the Labour Party. And he is simply rerunning the Morgan McSweeney playbook, which is you understand that someone who is honest about being on the Labour right will never make it past the membership. So what you do is you single leftwards. So Keir Starmer did that with 10 pledges, which I think, you know, he had no intention of ever keeping. Sebastian Payne said that a senior advisor who remained nameless, but I can only imagine his name possibly rhymed with Schmorgan Schmickschmeeny, said, you know, look at those 10 pledges, not one will tie our hands. And I think that you can see Wes Streeting through exactly the same lens. So he's making noises about a wealth tax. He's, you know, doing it out on a media round because that's what the membership wants to hear. But this is a membership which will have been fairly scarred by the recent experience with Keir Starmer. I don't necessarily think it will work. Maybe it's trying to create a sense of permission to give him a senior, you know, potentially even Big Four cabinet post under Andy Burnham. But thinking about like where you're facing, like which part of the electorate you're looking at. Streeting is looking right at the selectorate of the Labour Party membership. Andy Burnham is looking at Makerfield. So and neither one of these moments, and this will often be understood in this way because we have a media which lacks political literacy, is that
Not here in Novara media, though.
Not us, but they'll say, oh, country facing, this is why Burnham is endorsing Shabana Mahmood's immigration plans. Country facing, now, unshackled from cabinet collective responsibility, where Streeting can say the things that he really wants to say. No, politicians are simple Pavlovian creatures. They respond to incentives, and the incentive is the bit of the electorate they're relying on at any given time.
100%, 100%. And also worth pointing out, right, Wes Streeting is no stranger to deceptive leadership contests. Because first of all, he called Keir Starmer out for a deceptive leadership contest when he resigned the other week, right? He called out, things were slightly dishonest during the leadership election. But this is the same Wes Streeting, right? I remember this because I was watching this on stream where he was on Political Currency, which is Ed Balls and George Osborne's podcast. I believe it was Political Currency. And he essentially said, well, I was so relieved when Keir Starmer won the leadership contest because it meant we were going to be bringing the Labour Party back towards the centre. I was like, well, hang on a minute. It can't both be deceptive and you be condemning that potentially if you already knew that it was being deceptive because you were secretly hoping the guy who was really pro-Corbyn during the leadership election might win unless you were in on the game to begin with,
It was a bag of dirty lies and I loved every one of them.
So true. So true. And again, like the polling of the membership is something Morgan McSweeney did religiously and very, very methodically all the way through 2017 when he approached Keir Starmer to be a potential new leadership candidate and 2019.
And I think this is the thing about the Labour right, which is if there's one thing that they understand probably better than anyone, it is the Labour Party. They understand the mechanisms of the Labour Party. They understand the politics of the Labour Party. And I think they probably understand it a lot better than the Labour left does. And so when you have these deceptive campaigns being designed, it is on the basis of really robust polling, an understanding of how each piece connects with the other. So you're not just thinking about what's it going to be like when you have Keir Starmer installed as Labour leader? The composition of the National Executive Committee is as important, if not more important, because that's what's going to secure your candidate selections. And just to go back to Dan Needle, tax expert Dan Needle, he is part of Labour First. He was the Labour First candidate for the NEC. He donated to Luke Akehurst's election campaign in 2024. And I'm not doubting his expertise in the realm of tax, though actually I think that some of the admitted ignorance on his part of the specificities regarding council tax and canal boats, which are being used for residential purposes, points to there are gaps in some of his expertise. But he is a political operator, and he is a political operator who is using the clothing of, well, I'm an impartial expert on matters of tax for political purposes. Now, I've got no problem with being people being political operators outside of just, I am an elected, candidate or whatever, right? I'm totally fine with that, but there has to be a degree of honesty about it. You're a political operator, Dan Needle, and that's why you're like, oh, I didn't like wealth tax, but like Wes Streeting's coming out with something really good. I think if Andy Burnham came out with it, or God forbid, Zach Polanski, you'd be spitting feathers, mate.
So true. So true. Now, not to be outdone by his potential rival, Keir Starmer's government have joined the policy arms race today by announcing a swathe of cost of living measures that they're describing as the Great British Summer of Savings. The Prime Minister summarised the key proposals on his Substack, which apparently he has. We have a new package of support over the summer holidays to give parents a bit of breathing room. From the 25th of June to the 1st of September 2026, we are reducing VAT to 5% on a wide range of family experiences, from children's meals out, cinema tickets, and theatre shows to museums, zoos, fairs, and other attractions. That reduction will apply across the peak summer period, helping to bring prices down when families are most likely to need it. And from the 1st of August, every child aged 5 to 15 in England will be able to travel on buses for free for the entire month. For many families, that will make a real difference. Outside of targeted relief for families, he then went on to announce that the planned rise in fuel duty was to be scrapped too. We are extending the 5p cut to fuel duty for the rest of the year. That keeps fuel duty at its lowest rate in more than 16 years and will save the average driver around £120 by the end of the year. I do love how in this country motorists just continue to get pandered to by literally every single government. When it comes to council elections, it's all about potholes. When it comes to macro policy, we can increase the bus fare cap to £3, but we'll continue freezing fuel duty for endless year after year after year. And I'm just like, well, we are coming up to a supply shortage on fuel. Putting in demand side incentive for people to be able to purchase more of it doesn't sound like a good idea to me. And it is worth pointing out, I hate to invoke Dan Needle again for the second time in this segment, when it comes to reducing VAT on products, when we look at how that has affected things like menstrual products, for example, it didn't actually reduce the prices when you cut the VAT, right? The actual market price is the intersection of the supply-demand curve. I mean, the price has already been set by the free market in those cases. And so rather than reducing the price in line with a VAT cut with those products where it was tried on, they just increased the margin because people were already willing to buy those products at the original price. So whether or not that cut down to 5% will reduce prices for those attractions remains to be seen. Now, this comes after a week of good news on the economy for the embattled Prime Minister. Growth was higher than expected in Q1, and the IMF upgraded the UK's growth forecast for 2026 to 1%. This is on top of an unexpected drop in the headline rate of inflation to 2.8%, the lowest rate in over a year too, which must be agonising for a government that has squandered a favourable business cycle with unforced errors, only to have their modest economic gains set to be wiped out by the oncoming wave of inflation following the US-Israeli war on Iran. Another high-profile Labour figure appears to be tacking leftwards too. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has blocked a proposed £50 million deal between the Metropolitan Police and AI company Palantir after severe backlash against the Westminster government's insistence on partnering with the Trump-linked company on defence and healthcare contracts. One person who hasn't been reaching out leftwards is Andy Burnham. There were a lot of ruminations on what his policy prospectus might be as a potential leadership candidate, and in the last few days, he said that he won't touch electoral reform until the next election on the grounds that it's a constitutional change, so it would require a mandate from the electorate. He's also committed to adhering to Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules and has backed Shabana Mahmood's immigration reforms. Now, just on the Andy Burnham point, Ash, I'm going to say that when it comes to the proportional representation thing, whilst I understand his point on needing a mandate from the electorate, we're in Trump world now. Electorates are demanding action. I don't think people are necessarily fussed about constitutional process and things like that. People want to see action. People want to see things that are important to them being done quickly and without delay. So I don't really buy his argument that it's necessary to go to the election. But in terms of broadly the conversation here, who do you think here is going to be winning the votes of the left potentially?
Well, no, just to go back to Andy Burnham, there's a couple of ways to look at this. One is you look at Andy Burnham as a Keir Starmer rerun. So he makes left-wing noises. He's got no intention of carrying it out. He's going to run, a sort of standard Labour centrist project. I don't necessarily think that that's true. And the reason why is because while I don't think he's been a left-wing or a socialist mayor of Manchester, he's got a distinctive project, right? Which is he wants to in-house as much as he can, but the sort of compromise that he's making with capital is like real estate gets a free run and gentrification continues apace. All right? That's Manchesterism sort of in a nutshell. And I think that when he has said, look, the reason why there is so much political volatility is because you've got this five-party reality underneath the first past the post system, and you've got too much of being disciplined by the bond markets. I think he meant that shit, right? I think he meant it. So the way in which I see it is that I wonder if he's sequencing it as you win in Makerfield, you win the Labour Party leadership, and then you go for a general election, say this autumn. Because you go, the things I want to do, you need a mandate from the public. The public gave a strong mandate to the manifesto commitments of this Labour Party, the fiscal rules contained within, not going to touch the electoral system, et cetera, et cetera. I need a new one. And the reason why you would do that, not just because, I really want proportional representation, but for sort of more calculated reasons as well, is because I think he can see the writing on the wall, all right? Your favourabilities are only going to go down. Right? The longer you're in, the better it is for reform. So come in on a bounce, galvanise a stop reform vote behind you, try and block them out for at least the next bit of the electoral cycle. You might be thinking that's the best he can do.
I mean, I can understand that rationale there, especially given the fact that all of the things that caused the Conservative Party to implode, that's happening again. Imminently, we're going to see another oil shock, another set of cost push inflation where the country will get poorer. I know we've had a lot of discussion about price controls. We've had discussions about how the government can subsidize different things, right? When it comes to what's happening with a supply chain shock, which will affect our economy because we've not prepared for it, the UK will get poorer. That's just a reality. That's what happened when oil prices go up. The question, of course, is who becomes poorer? Whose back do we place that on? And that's the answer that I want to hear from politicians on broadly those appealing to the left, is how do we look at these coming price shocks and say, look, well, if we're going to see a reduction in the overall supply of goods in the economy, because that's what's going to be the biggest impact on energy for these higher energy prices, then there's somebody's going to have to lose out. And the question, of course, is that in the 1970s, that led to a wage price spiral because no one was willing to give in. What model are we going to look towards from some future left-wing party, whether it's the Green Party or a renewed Labour Party under some kind of new leadership that might move to the left, is what's their plan? Because it's coming real soon.
And look, you can also see why, from Burnham's point of view, he's like, I don't want to tell you my plan now. I need to win in Makerfield. I'm not going to be fucking torn apart by the right-wing media about how I want to nationalise your garden or whatever it was, the kinds of attacks that Jeremy Corbyn came under. I'm not doing that now. I have to win this by-election. So you can see the case from a political calculation perspective of why you would not say everything you're going to do at once. And I kind of think that... Okay, I'm not sure if I think this, but you know what? I'm going to try the idea. I've been entertaining the idea that actually the thing that you want to do to win general elections is you have a big vibes-based campaign, you have policy work going on in the background, and you have a super slim manifesto. So one of the mistakes that I think I was a part of making in 2019 with the Corbyn project is that I thought, the way in which you get a guaranteed socialist government and a socialist program is you stuff the manifesto with all the radical shit you want to see. And so that became the thing that the left was really concerned with doing. Now, probably should have been more concerned with going, how do you shore up a vote, which has, been crumbling and, saw signs of disintegrating in 2017. But that was the thinking. Boris Johnson writes, get Brexit done on the back of a fag packet, right? He, wins a stonking majority. So I think that there is a sort of case for manifesto minimalism to get you past a general election. But it entirely depends on whether or not you would trust Andy Burnham on a project of manifesto minimalism. Is another thing entirely, right? Which Andy Burnham are we getting? There's the joke of a Corbynista, a Brownite and a Blairite walk into a bar, bartender says, and what will it be tonight, Mr. Burnham? Which Andy Burnham are you going to get? How is he going to react to the disciplining tools both within the Labour Party and also externally, particularly thinking about the bond markets? And who is it that he's looking to for policy drafts at the moment? We don't know any of those things. So I would say if you had, a sort of Zoran Mamdani type candidate, someone who has a long and deep history of being on the left, I would say don't try and get him to verbally commit to all the shit that you want. That's a bad idea, right? Like manifesto minimalism. Very different kind of candidate with Andy Burnham.
I think the only issue with that strategy is that this is basically the Starmer project. In fact, I have referenced many times, because you directly called this stuff out to Darren Jones's face on Politics Live, where you said, this manifesto here, all that's there to do is to get you over the line. And there's going to be a bunch of stuff where you do reforms to certain kinds of taxation after the election. And that was literally what happened. I remember Darren Jones shaking his head at you going, no, us, have a light manifesto, then just go, shock horror, things are worse than we feared, do these things with no necessarily mandate from the public. And what was the electorate's reaction to this? They bounced off it immediately. It was like, you're doing this, and this. It wasn't in the manifesto. You've lied to us as a public. And there was immediately a 3 million signature petition for a general election because the public felt betrayed by a manifesto that didn't contain the things that they actually did.
You certainly don't say something like no tax rises and then you go, okay, no, but it's just going to be on, employers' national, national insurance contributions. You don't do it like that. What I mean by vibes is like, get Brexit done was sort of a floating signifier.
True.
What does it mean to get Brexit done? It was appealing to this idea of we all just want this fucking over, right? Like you do this sort of like big vibe, right? Like something which speaks to the moment. It's really slim in the manifesto. The thing is that the approach of Keir Starmer, and I suppose this is where I differ with you, is that there were quite specific promises that he thought he could get out of on a technicality. And
yeah,
that's
because the wording that they used specifically was, there are no things in our manifesto that require tax rises.
Yeah.
That was the specific wording. I remember Wes Streeting came out with it so often when they were pressed heavily on this kind of stuff, on loads of discussion shows. Like, there are no tax rises that are necessary to be able to deliver the things in our manifesto. And then it was like, oh, black hole. There we go.
And then they'll go, oh, but we never actually promised that, because if you look at the wording, and no one likes that, right? No one likes someone getting off on a technicality. So I think that is actually really different from the kind of manifesto minimalism of Boris Johnson.
I think that's probably true.